president, if you make a high crime and misdemeanor out of going to the courts, it is an abuse of power. It's your abuse of power. You're doing precisely what you're criticizing the president for doing. We have a third branch that deals with conflicts of the other two branches. And what comes out of there and what you do with it is the very definition of legitimacy.
That was George Washington University law professor Jonathan Turley warning lawmakers Wednesday that it would be an abuse of their authority to impeach President Trump and urging them to respect the separation of powers during the impeachment process. Turley's comments came as the House Judiciary Committee heard testimony from 4 legal scholars Wednesday on the constitutional grounds for presidential impeachment. Let's bring in our own constitutional attorney, David Rivkin. David, welcome back. Good to see you again.
Pleasure.
Let's go through the arguments one by one. I guess the main argument they're making is that the president abused his power. What do you make of that?
Constitutionally incoherent, Paul. The president exercised his core foreign policy authority to talk to Ukraine about investigating past corruption. Whether you like it or dislike it as a matter of policy, that is squarely within his constitutional wheelhouse. Now, the Democrats are saying, well, he also obtained a private benefit because he could benefit politically from the investigation of Mr. Biden,
right,
of Biden's son.
And therefore it's bribery. He solicited a bribe is the claim.
Right. Well, the reason it's incoherent is because in a democracy, every elected politician, both political branches, then he or she tried to drive policy legislatively or foreign policy-wise, is always thinking about political consequences. To put it crisply, Paul, under this logic, every president is committing an impeachable offense virtually every single day, including, by the way, as you point out in an excellent editorial, that's the case with Mr. Biden, because Mr. Biden's view was, look, I'm going to ask Ukraine to fire the prosecutor and freeze the aid unless it gets done, and I had in mind raison d'etat, right, reason of state. But it's also arguable that because this prosecutor appeared to be investigating wanted to investigate his son, he would also benefit from politically. So basically, what they're suggesting would be sufficient to impeach Biden. And by the way, there's precedent in our practice of impeaching past government officials. So Biden is eminently impeachable.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Jonathan Turley made the point, which I thought I hadn't focused on, and I wondered what you think of it, which is that this would be the first impeachment in American history, if it proceeds as it will, without a specific criminal statute or crime that the president who's impeached would have allegedly committed. Is that your view too?
It is my view, although in the case of Andrew Johnson, who was accused of violating Tenure in Office Act, it certainly would not, looking at his articles of impeachment, he did not violate any criminal law. But I would put it slightly differently.
But that law was later declared unconstitutional, but it was at least a law.
It was, right. Right. It was not criminal law, but it was a law.
Yeah.
Yes, look, what we have is sloganeering here. It is, I agree with Jonathan, I think this is the worst example of abuse of impeachment power in American history. It's completely lacking in merit. The president has not committed any high crime and misdemeanor. He's not committed bribery. He's not committed any other high crime and misdemeanor. And what the Democrats are doing is engage in sloganeering. They're saying he asked Ukraine to intervene in U.S. elections. Look, every time, for example, if you're asking Chinese Premier Xi to give you a good trade deal from which you would benefit politically, are you asking Mr. Xi to interfere in U.S. elections? What about Chairman Kim and denuclearization agreement?
Well,
this whole argument is absurd.
Okay, but then the Democrats would say, but he didn't ask Xi to investigate Joe Biden, and that's the difference.
But that's a distinction without a difference, Paul. The argument is, first of all, look, the United States asks foreign governments to investigate U.S. nationals every single day of a week, and I'm not being rhetorical, number one. Number two, you don't obtain any benefit if you're running for office. What, you're supposedly not subject to being investigated? Why was Mr. Trump investigated when he was running for office? And not only by the FBI, but also investigated apparently by a number of foreign intelligence services at the request, I happen to believe, by certain folks here. I mean, there's no content here as far as the high crime and misdemeanor is concerned. And what Jonathan Turley was talking about is the other part. They want to stick him with obstruction of Congress.
Right,
That's even more ludicrous.
Yeah, I want you to elaborate on that because, they're saying that he has blocked all of this, blocked document production and blocked witnesses from testifying, and therefore he's obstructing their probe. What's wrong with that argument?
This is even more ridiculous if we're going to make a comparison. Look, President does not forfeit his constitutional prerogatives merely because an impeachment has been commenced. The President is entitled under two recognized species of executive privilege, the immediate advisor privilege and national security privilege, to withhold this information. The President's advisors, including Mr. Bolton and Mr. Kupperman, have taken it to court. The Democrats are the ones who are eliding litigation. How can you possibly, as Jonathan Turley correctly pointed out, how can you possibly stick the President with obstruction charge because he's asking, and his people asking Article 3 of the judiciary for definitive adjudication? Stick him with obstruction if he disagrees and doesn't follow a definitive Supreme Court adjudication on this issue. But it cannot be that merely going to court, which is, I hate to say, is the most, as American as apple pie, Paul, can possibly be obstructive.
Yeah. All right, David. Rivkin, appreciate your being here. Thanks so much.
Pleasure.